The Dancing with Depression podcast is brought to you by CAS-CM, where CM stands for Content Matters, because content brings people together. Welcome to the Dancing with Depression podcast. I'm your host, Adam Turner. This podcast exists to create honest conversations around mental health. The parts of life we often carry quietly, the moments that challenge us, and the people and resources that help us find a way forward. Today's conversation centers around something incredibly important: the mental health of our veterans and the journey many face after service. Joining me today is Marcus Farris, the Post-Traumatic Growth Director at Mission 22, an organization dedicated to supporting veterans and their families while working to reduce and one day eliminate veteran suicide. In this episode, Marcus and I talk about the mental health challenges veterans often face when transitioning back into civilian life, why finding a new tribe, purpose, and mission after service can be so critical, the difference between post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic growth, how coaching, community, and shared struggle can help veterans reconnect with themselves and others, and how organizations like Mission 22 are creating pathways for veterans and families to heal together. This conversation also goes deeper than statistics. It explores identity, purpose, and connection, and why the things that once made someone strong in service don't disappear. They simply need assistance finding where their strengths fit now. So whether you're a veteran, someone who loves a veteran, or simply someone interested in understanding the human side of mental health a little better, I'm grateful you're here. Let's get into the conversation with Marcus. So, Marcus, before we get into the work that Mission 22 is doing today, I think it's important for listeners to get a better understanding of kind of where it all began. Organizations like this usually start because someone recognized a problem that couldn't be ignored. Can you share just a little bit of the story behind Mission 22, how it started and why it was created?
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for having me on here today, Adam. And it's one of the topics that is kind of fun to share because, well, fun in one way and a little tragic in another. The genesis of Mission 22 started back around 2013 when the founder, Magnus Johnson, after having served 2 tours as a Green Beret and 1 prior to that as an infantryman, came back, finished his service time, and lost one of his friends to suicide. And that came as a pretty significant shock, as he had no idea that the issue was so widespread. And so he kind of surveyed what sort of help is available and what's preventing people from receiving the help that they need following service or even, during service. And come to find out, there are thousands of veterans charities that already exist. The VA has who knows how many billions of dollars of funding. What is missing? And so to start an organization as audacious as saying we're going to make it 22 a day, 0 a day, you kind of have to have a little bit of that mild craziness that comes with a Green Beret operator. Imagine an ODA of about 12 guys who are told, hey, you need to go topple this government, the 12 of you. All right, ready to go. And then the guys, rather than being like, oh, this is mission impossible, it can't be done. It's like, oh no, let's go. Yeah, we can do that. And so with that sort of attitude of, we really do believe that we can make a huge dent in this issue, he and a couple of other operator friends, to start raising money, went to a scrapyard and got old pieces of metal and fashioned them into art pieces that they then sold at auction. And that is kind of how they got off the ground. So you have this image of this old garage, a couple of guys figuring out how to weld. And so the welding part of it kind of was the genesis of taking things that were discarded and then creating something brand new out of them. And eventually they created a display that you can find in Nashville, Indiana called Soaring, which is 22 of these really cool looking ornate leaves that demonstrate the sort of beauty and tragedy of those that we lost and the struggle that people are still kind of going through. And maybe are a lot of times when it's difficult to put things into words, you use art to show, to like speak in a different sort of tone, in a different sort of way. And so that's kind of how we got off the ground. We're originally founded in the Indiana area. We're now in Central Oregon. And we're running these programs where a lot of it really did have to do with a condensation of what Magnus did to kind of get back on track and to heal, and then replicate that out with a program that is very sort of methodical of you get paired with a coach, you get paired with some supplementation, some books for context, some meditation devices, all of this stuff that he had to go through, we kind of created into our programs. And so the DNA of Mission 22, to kind of state it again, is to see human beings where they've otherwise been discarded and then teach them, show them what it's like to create something brand new.
That is awesome. Like you said, there's the tragedy behind it, but the beauty in the process, and that is very, very cool. And again, people hear the name Mission 22, but I don't know that everybody understands the meaning behind it. Can you explain what the number 22 represents and why it became such an important part of the organization's identity?
Yeah. So originally the company was called Elderheart, and the idea there was the member of the tribe who came back from war and had things to share and spread. Like, you go to your elders for wisdom, and I think that's a very crucial component that our culture kind of forgets. And we're sort of making false idols and false elders out of figures who really, weren't ever meant to serve that role per se. And so we're trying to kind of have the spirit of the elder in the tribe who has been around the block, who like sits down by the fire and kind of goes through, listen, your life is not about you. You're going to die. You're going to hear all these life lessons, but here's the beauty out of that. But eventually we found that Mission 22 was like a more immediate resonance for people who sort of saw what we were up to. And so in 2013, the VA put out a statistic that's how many service members we were losing to suicide every day. And you do the math on it, and you see that we've lost far more people to the proverbial war at home than we ever did in combat. And so not too long ago, the VA put out, I think it was for 2024, the more like a little bit more of an updated stat. And I think the number is like closer to 17 a day now, but it's still like, it's hard to figure out exactly what the number is because depending on how you count, the point is the problem is still alive and well, regardless of what's going on with, like, you might think, oh, well, the prolonged war in Afghanistan and Iraq is more or less over. It's war that causes these mental health issues. Well, not exactly. I mean, a kinetic war in that way certainly has its own challenge set, but it's also the case that the veteran story is kind of the canary in the coal mine for everybody else. I mean, suicide rates are across the board are up. I recently just heard about somebody, didn't know them directly, but the mother of a 14-year-old who, I think she was a gym owner or something like that. I don't know all the details, but the 14-year-old took her own life. Mm-hmm. And it's like, there's something rotten in the state of Denmark here. And we find that the pattern that the veterans exemplify of not just how they get stuck in the proverbial abyss, but also how they come out of it and have something to share. When you are able to tell that story of a veteran being able to come out of that dark abyss and then, looking at the archetypal storylines of the hero's journey, you come out the other side with the elixir of life that you can then share with others. That same pattern that's exemplified by veterans is something that the rest of the culture needs to see, understand, and know that they can take part to.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think connection is something that I've talked about a lot. Knowing that you're not alone, knowing that somebody else is, maybe you can't get the words like you said, but there are ways to express yourself and that there is help out there. I'm always curious about, the people behind the mission, and you've mentioned the person who created it and kind of spearheaded it and so on. But what drew you personally into the work and into supporting veterans in this way?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my undergrad was in industrial engineering. I joined the Army out of Auburn ROTC back in 2012 or so. I was an officer for the Corps of Engineers for about 4 years and then branch transferred to PSYOP as a reserve officer for a little bit. And through all that, one of the passions in my heart was getting veterans together and doing endurance sports. And for me, that was triathlon and ultra running and stuff like that. And it filled a very special place in my heart when I was involved in a group that was like going after this kind of niche thing, because Ironman and ultra marathons are a little, it's not something that everybody does. But then once you that was sort of my tribe. And after I finished my active duty time, it's like, okay, well, my credentials are sort of with engineering, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but I also lived in Bend, Oregon, and, originally I lived in Huntsville, Alabama for a little while. If I had stayed down there, you find a great career on the Redstone Arsenal, and then Bob's your uncle. But life had thrust me into this location and this time, this place where I didn't feel like I fit with an engineer degree, project management background, and Bend, Oregon. If you don't know anything about Bend, Oregon, it's the primary industries are like tourism, construction, and healthcare. And like, I didn't really fit in any of those. And so I had it on my heart of like, man, how could I make a career out of this sort of passion I have of getting veterans together, doing big events? And that was around the time that I had this whole sort of breakdown story myself. I was in a marriage that fell apart. I got fired twice from jobs that were like sucking my soul out of my face like a Dementor. And it was like in my own abyss where Mission 22 sort of found me. And right away, I started learning what health coaching was and went through a health coaching certification. And it's like, okay, this seems like the way, but how am I going to actually make this into like a career? And, by the grace of God, I met Magnus Johnson at this guy's group in Portland at one point, and the rest is kind of history from there.
That's awesome. You had mentioned the statistic, and when people hear that, it's pretty heavy. And I think off the bat, people do that math and they can't comprehend it. But, for those folks that don't fully understand what veterans are navigating once they come home, from your experience working with veterans, like what are some of the biggest mental health challenges that veterans face when they transition back into civilian life?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with how at one point in life, you're told you're going to fight our nation's wars. We're going to put a high-powered weapon in your hand. We're going to put you with a whole team of these, just like slayers, and you're going to go and conquer the world. And you tell a young guy that, and it's like, yes, I'm answering my call to adventure. And then it's over, and it's like, okay, did my life just peak? And then when I'm trying to plug in with the civilian world, no one seems to understand me. It's sort of like the analogy I use a lot is like, let's say you're taught how to play tennis all of your life, and you're told like, hey, life is this game where you have this racket, and here's the court, and here's the net. And then you get really good at it. And then one day it's like, okay, I've got my racket. I'm going to a different court. And then suddenly people are throwing stuff at you. Everyone's wearing helmets. You're getting tackled. You're like, what is happening? And there's this absurdity of the sort of mismatch, this unfittedness of, I was this player and I'm in this arena. The technical term is agent-arena relationship. I'm not going to nerd out on all of that. But basically it's like, what is happening right now? This is not how I was told how to do things. And so I think that by itself is an area where, so veterans at one point had that community, had a bond with other people where I know that I can do really difficult things and dangerous things with other guys. And that bonds you like almost nothing else, right? And some soldiers feel more bonded to their fellow squad members than they do to their own family just because they've been through like hell and back. And you can understand why those bonds are forged so tightly. And so you have it once, and then now you're in an arena where it's like, people living for the weekend and, someone's got a case of the Monday. Like, okay, it's like, this doesn't fire me up anymore. So I think probably the biggest thing is refinding a tribe that's very similar to that isn't just rallying around like, okay, well, let's go to the VFW and get $2 PBRs and just sort of talk about war stories. And, God bless the VFW. I'm not trying to knock that, but like the sort of down and out, I'm just this broken, washed up veteran. My best days are behind me. I don't know, like no one really understands me. And like, why even engage anymore? And so the new call to adventure is that was only one part of your life. And there's something brand new that you can now expand out of that. You were a warrior, but now you can kind of take on the role of king, to allude back to some of the ancient archetypes. But the idea being like, warrior was one part of you. And now, like, can we expand that out? And for example, in the Recovery and Resiliency program that we run here at Mission 22, some of the things that we've seen is like guys will start like opening up a yoga studio or doing this brand new volunteer work. And like the passion of, I can go fight wars and take down a country can be retooled. And I think a lot of like the clinical psychology world doesn't quite understand the psyche of the warrior, where it's like, oh, you think about violence. Oh, you miss combat. Oh, something's wrong with you as a result of those things. It's like, no, man, these are your warrior class. Like that's a feature, not a bug. And so what does it look like to transmute that into a brand new venture. And to answer that question, I think the best way to do that is find a group that you can do really hard things again with. Maybe that's entrepreneurship. Maybe that's a CrossFit gym. Maybe it could be a lot of things. So finding that connection and plug-in point, I think would probably be the biggest mover of the needle in veterans' mental health.
There's a lot of things going through my mind because I'm that kind of would lump myself into the well-intentioned civilian that misunderstands like what veterans are actually experiencing, right? And so what are some of those biggest like misconceptions people have about veteran mental health?
Yeah, I think kind of what I was getting at before, where veterans are a class of people who think about violence. And that doesn't make them broken or bad. That's part of the deal. We think about things in maybe morose ways that civilians like, we need to treat the violent part of you. Like, well, hang on, I'll put it this way. So there was a essay I read during my time in the military called On Sheepdogs and Wolves. And the idea there was like 1% of the population are sheepdogs, 1% of the population are wolves, and 98% of the population are sheep. And it's not sheep in the sense of like, wake up, sheeple, like they're trying to deceive you. No, that's not what we're saying. It's just like there are a large class of people who are sheep, who like, they're the people who go and they teach, or they go and they do their office job. And if that's the life they want, then fantastic. But they're not warriors, and that's okay. But the 1% of the population who are sheepdogs know that there's such a thing as a wolf that will take out a sheep at a moment's notice. And the sheep are largely ignorant of what that is. And there's a cost to being a wolf. I forget who said it, but it was in World War II, someone was saying something along the lines of, in order for the Allies to win this victory, you sort of have to internalize, like you have to become your own type of monster, right? In order to face down the darkness, you have to integrate that monstrous part of you. The difference between the proverbial villain and the hero is that they're both very capable of violence, but the hero has that under control, right? And so I think honoring the fact that that is a feature, not a bug of this class of people. Look, sheep need sheepdogs. Like, and when the sheep look at a sheepdog, they see teeth and they see claws and they confuse the sheepdog for a wolf. And so I think having that better appreciation of that class of people. And of course, you can imagine like police officers and firefighters kind of are maybe within that class of sheepdog. But I think that would be the best sort of illustration I could give on how a civilian population could better understand what veterans are about.
Absolutely. So one of the things that stood out to me about Mission 22 is that the organization isn't just about like awareness, it's actively providing support and programs. Can you just kind of walk us through some of the core programs Mission 22 offers to veterans and their families? You mentioned one, and I want to put myself out there as an example. I saw R&R and quickly thought rest and relaxation. And then I read the description. I'm like, nope, that's not exactly what that is.
Yeah. Well, now you see the double entendre. Yeah. So Recovery and Resiliency, R&R, has been our flagship program over about the last 5 years. We're currently in a fundraising phase to get those cohorts back up off the ground. But what I would say is that the bread and butter of the support that we provide is through coaching. So what is coaching exactly? Well, I've given this a lot of thought and how you see this whole like reduce the stigma to go see the counselor and mental health and stuff like that. And I've even come across Army commands who now mandate that like, okay, everyone goes and sees the counselor. And I'm just like face palming like, okay, how often does compulsory counseling fix anything? And maybe for some people it could be helpful. But by and large, my thought is like maybe the stigma is actually warranted. Because if you take a soldier who sees himself or herself as like, I'm a warrior who's capable of doing these things, and you're telling me I'm sick because you're telling me to go see a doctor effectively. Like a counselor is a clinician. I don't see myself as sick, so why would I go to the clinician? Right? But it's also the case that like the chances are you would really benefit from at least having a sounding board. And so coaching is this model where it's like, it's far more approachable. It's like, oh yeah, I had a coach when I was little. I had soccer, like someone who's coaching me through kind of some of these struggles is a much more approachable way where like, they're not going to diagnose me. They're not going to send me medication. They're not going to tell me I can't do a certain duty with my job. But if I have personal goals and I'm blind to the barriers that's getting in between me and those things that are important to me, maybe having this guide by my side actually is the next unlock. And we've seen that time and time again for people who are engaged in the coaching process. They'll start to see, like, I was so blind to kind of the waters I was swimming in, and this coach kind of helped me to see that. And now I can take agency for myself and make the changes I want to make on my terms. And so that's kind of the magic of coaching that we've really been providing here. And then along with that, we have, of course, our ambassador program, which has been around even longer than the R&R program. Something like 3,000 to 4,000 individuals across the country who are telling Mission 22's story, who are at booths and events and things like that. And for the listeners, if you want to really like take the next step to be involved, check out our ambassador program. And one program that I'm particularly excited about, given the context of this conversation, is the Apex Crew, which is a newer program of veteran athletes who basically are showcasing stories of post-traumatic growth through things like CrossFit or Spartan races or High Rocks or endurance-based events. And so for me personally, it's very cool because it's kind of coming full circle of like doing those endurance events with the other veteran athletes. So that's something I'm personally very excited about right now.
That's awesome. I love the activity part of it, and the coaching really speaks to me. But coaching, I think of instantaneously playing sports and so on. So I like that connection there. There's also the peer-led retreat where, for someone hearing about that for the first time, what does a retreat actually look like, and how is it helping the veteran with regards to healing or start to begin healing?
Well, I can only speak third hand as we don't have peer-led retreats at Mission 22 necessarily, but we do have partner organizations that do things like that, where I'll give an example. So American Hero Adventures, I believe it is a local organization here in Central Oregon where they will do couples retreats. They'll do retreats where it could be anything from like some sort of, elk hunting adventure in Alaska to we're going to go to Indonesia. And so the idea of a retreat in that way is to kind of help to, the way I would put it, is breaking your frame. And so you ever go on a trip and you get a rental car, you're sitting there in the rental car and you feel like a freaking idiot because like all of the things are not in the right place.
Yes.
And so all of your normal habits are like broken because they don't work because you're now in a new environment. And actually voluntarily putting yourself in an environment where your routine day-to-day activities are sort of broken apart a little bit can be really helpful in being able to see like, oh, okay, my way of being in my normal day-to-day routine actually can be altered. One of the hallmark, I would say, characteristics of post-traumatic growth is exploring new possibilities for yourself, right? So trauma or moral injury can like keep you stuck and like your entire life is about one or two events or maybe a series of events. But as you start to grow, you start to see there are new possibilities available out there for you. And by going on a retreat or something like that, one of the things that can be very helpful with that is being able to like take a step back, see that like, oh, like for me, I remember going to Japan on a army mission once and just, it always dawns on me when you go to a new country and you see all of these people doing their life and having no consciousness of what you're doing with your life. And it's like, man, they're doing this every day. Like, obviously that's true, but like to see it firsthand,
Sure.
like, wow, there's so many other ways of being. There's so many other ways of living. And maybe it gives you more appreciation for your own way of doing things. Or maybe it's like, oh, I'd kind of like to adopt some of that. That looks pretty cool. So any kind of retreat, though, I would say too, is like, it's great as kind of a catalyst. What does it look like to keep that momentum going? And so that's kind of where Mission 22 comes in. And a lot of people who have been part of our programs have said as much, where they're like, oh yeah, I went on this weekend retreat and it was great and we high-fived and made friends and then we dispersed and then there was no follow-up. And so what would it look like then to have a follow-up of something like coaching, something like a, program where you've got a library of books, you've got a whole series of educational materials. And so that's what Mission 22 provides.
Nice. And so with that, are there other organizations that you'll connect with, whether it's local resources or community support, once they begin the process with Mission 22?
It's kind of on an as-needed basis. For the listener, you can go onto mission22.org and there's a partner page where it's organizations that we've had some type of contact with that we would endorse. So, for example, there's a canine organization. Like Mission 22 doesn't provide service dogs, but we can point you to somewhere who does. And then as far as sort of more local organizations, I would say for the most part, for people who go through R&R, it's only ever so often they're needing additional support in the form of like financial help or food support or something like that. But we've been around long enough and we've networked enough to where, yes, we have if you're in the program, you'll have access to a whole list of various resources that could either be local to you, something nationwide, or something like that.
Gotcha. Cool. So one of the things that I also noticed was veterans in their families and the families being apart. Can you talk a little bit more about that with regards to the support and why that support is needed?
Definitely. So one of the things that is often overlooked is that as a veteran, usually it's the male who's been off to war. As he's starting to improve, the wife saw her role in that relationship as like, I'm this caregiver that offers this type of help. And she's amazing in that. And she's really good at like taking care of my veteran with PTSD. And then he starts to heal, starts not to need that help anymore. And then she's like, well, what am I, chopped liver? Like, where am I in this growth journey? And for one guy to like grow and not have his support system around them growing too, you can understand how there'd be a huge disconnect. And in fact, the stats on divorce post-growth are kind of alarming. So that's why for the Recovery and Resiliency program, we have a spouse track that you can take. And so it includes books like Arsenal of Hope. I believe some Brene Brown stuff is in there, Daring Greatly, things like that. But I mentioned before how the story of the veteran improving and growing from trauma, it's the same pattern as everybody else. So yes, it's like the veteran is in that sort of sheepdog category, but the growth story is universal. And being able to teach that to the entire family unit has been a game changer. And I have a lot of these exit interviews with folks who've gone through the program. And one of my questions I always ask is, how's this affected your relationships? And man, dude, it's so cool because like they'll say things like, my temper is down. I can actually like speak more fluidly. I'm not taking things as personally. I'm getting the kids involved in some of the stuff I'm doing. And I'm just like, I've got my pom-poms over here, just like shaking her like, yes, like this is it. Like that's what we're about.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think that impact of your surroundings plays a big part in, making sure that everybody is supported. And as you said, it's great that they're working towards success and improvement. You want to make sure that everybody's coming along with you as well and that they've got the support. So that's great. So as far as like, you've mentioned some folks at a high level and obviously without sharing anything confidential, can you share like an example of a veteran whose life was changed specifically after working with Mission 22?
Yeah, well, what the listener can do is go to our YouTube page. There are a couple of mini documentaries we did a few years back when we were first getting R&R off the ground. And this has all been made public. So Jeremy Wellman, shout out to him. I believe he was in the Marine Corps. Don't be mad if I got that wrong. But anyway, he tells this really cool story of how some of the stuff that he experienced in war and trying to integrate back home became a process that it's a similar story every time. It's like, I'm not where I used to be, but, I'm not where I want to be, but I'm not where I used to be. And maybe the post-traumatic stress symptoms haven't totally gone away, but now I know what to do with them. I have context for them. I know where to put them. And so in Jeremy's case, he ended up founding a yoga studio. And like for him, it was like an entrepreneur route. There's also a gal named Olga Tucker, shout out to Olga, who was I believe she was an 88 mic truck driver for the Army. And she had some challenges. Again, this is all public. She shared this in the story. You can go and watch it. And there was a certain deployment that came with it, some particular baggage. And she had some previous challenges with the family life. But then after getting on board with R&R and starting to get her body right and getting her body moving, one of her projects was she was restoring this old house for the widower of a World War II veteran. And just stuff like that. It's like, it's a fractal pattern. When you start to understand, oh, this is how this works for getting better, and the scar on my heart is a feature of my human experience and not a flaw, now I can push that forward and illuminate, shine forth that healing journey and impact others.
That's awesome. I'm going to go a little bit off on not a tangent, but something I recently learned, and I want to see if you can shed a little bit of light on it. I think, the conversation I had with my friend Mark, retired Marine, he shared some things that I hadn't thought of, which was I always kind of associated the combat as kind of like that main component of what folks were dealing with when they came back. But he alluded to some things that being away from family for the first time, maybe in a new relationship and now you're deployed and stuff like that. And he also mentioned, like, the idea of people had an idea of what to expect, but that didn't necessarily mean they knew how to deal with it. Can you shed some light on that? I know I'm kind of going off a little bit, but I'm very curious your insight on that.
I think one thing to understand, especially for combat veterans, is that for a lot of them, the chaos of battle is like when they operate the best. And so, surrounded by a high cortisol, high stress environment, it's like, okay, game time, let's go. And then it's actually the challenge is when things are still and quiet. And I don't like this because nothing is happening and nothing is stimulating. And this is not how I'm wired and this is not how I'm trained. And maybe that's surprising to the warrior, him or herself, of like, oh, wow, it was actually, it's kind of no wonder though. You look at the training, I jumped out of airplanes a couple of times. The first few times are like, oh my gosh. And then the next couple of times are like, yes, let's go. Let's do this. Let's go. Yes, yes, yes. And like, it's hard to replicate something like that outside of the military. And so it shouldn't be as surprising that, wait, the things that I'm challenged with isn't so much like, yeah, okay, my body and my buddy maybe got hurt in combat, but actually we sort of expected that. Like there's like, well, yeah, we're in war. Like, yeah, it hurts and it sucks and, but I have a context for this. Like I have a context for warriors going into the line of duty and getting injured in support of the nation or in support of the guy next to you. What I don't have a context for is like, oh my gosh, I've never been away from home for this long. I've never like, the Dear John letter that can flatten somebody more than something that's happened in combat. Now, your mileage may vary depending on your situation, and maybe you had more context for a relationship breaking down for the third time. Hey, listen, I've been there. Okay, I'm not judging, but yeah. So, what do you do to heal with that? Well, I think the main thing, one of the things I've really learned about grief is that grief demands a witness, and so here's maybe one way to put it: social media is exposure and judgment. Here, look at this. What do you think? Look at this. Like, do you like this? Here's a small slice of who I think I am. Do you like it? And as Jonathan Haidt would mention in his work, oh my gosh, it's like to say that that's toxic is to say almost nothing at all. However, the thing that I think people are after is bearing witness and vulnerability. That's where healing happens. To have others bear witness to you being honest about a thing. And it doesn't have to be like wear your heart on your sleeve and you got to be all emotional and talk about feelings all the time. But I think even just, especially for men, just to be able to say like, I'm actually kind of stressed out right now about this thing and it's been tough. And then for other guys to come around and like, okay, yeah, I see you. Like I see you. And so just being seen on a deeper level, like that by itself is like the most valuable human currency there possibly is. Right? That's what sort of intimacy is, right? It didn't have to be between husband and wife, but like, bro, I see you in that circumstance. And just with that alone, you've just taken 30 pounds out of your rucksack, right? So I'm going on a little bit of a tangent with my answer, but you went off on a tangent with your question. So.
No, that's fair. And I'm literally like a bobblehead doll shaking my head. Yes, because being seen is, I think, an incredible feeling once it happens. And there is a connection that comes with that. So, Marcus, before we wrap up, I'd like to speak directly to anyone listening who just might be struggling, whether they're a veteran themselves or someone who loves one. What message would you want them to hear today?
Don't do it alone. Taking care of yourself now is your way of taking care of other people later. We tend not to want to share our stuff because it's like, I don't want to bother other people. I don't want to tear them down. But sharing your need is a gift to another person because then it's going to come around the other way. Like, I guarantee you, like, take this to the bank. If you ask for an appropriate amount of help now, someone else will ask for help from you later that you will then be able to give because you asked for it in the first place. Right? So for somebody who's like, I don't want to burden somebody else, it's not their problem, I'm going to keep it to myself. I get that. And there is a sense in which you can be a burden if it's just like the constant mooching and like handouts after handouts. And yes, there is that. But it's also the case that just because your pain and suffering, relatively speaking, isn't as bad as the quadriplegic or whatever, doesn't mean that it's not legitimate. And also, again, by asking for a certain level of help, now that enables you to then be the first aid kit to somebody else later. So on an expanded timeline, asking for help is kind of the same thing as giving help because you're taking care of yourself across time and not just for your immediate need.
That's powerful. And I hope that message is duplicated over and over. We can help each other, and it starts by helping ourselves. So that's great. And so for the listeners who want to learn more or get involved, the best place to start is mission22.org. There you can learn about the programs that Marcus has mentioned, the volunteer opportunities, events, and ways to support the mission. I end with this, and I keep it candid. If there's any question you have for me, you're more than welcome to fire away. If not, that's okay as well.
Right on. Yeah, and I might also add in there, if you're into podcasting, as maybe you are, if you've made it this far on the show, quick plug for the Resiliency podcast, which Mission 22 also has launched or relaunched, I guess, a few months ago. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Very
Thanks,
cool.
Adam. Really appreciate you.
No, absolutely. Thank you for the work that you're doing, and especially for taking the time to share this with us today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
One of the things that stayed with me after this conversation with Marcus was the origin story of Mission 22. It started with a group of veterans in a garage, welding together pieces of discarded metal, taking things that had been thrown away and turning them into something meaningful, something new. And the more I thought about it, the more it started to feel like a powerful metaphor for the journey many veterans go through after service. Now, I'll say this openly, I didn't serve, and I'm not going to pretend that hearing someone's story suddenly means I understand what that experience is like. But hearing Marcus talk about it gave me a perspective I didn't have before. Marcus described how the military provides mission, brotherhood, adrenaline, and purpose. A structure where you know the role you play, the people beside you, and the stakes involved in what you're doing. For many civilians, me included, it can be difficult to fully grasp what it's like to move from that kind of environment into a world that operates very differently. And what stood out to me in our conversation is that many veterans aren't necessarily trying to escape who they were in service. They're trying to understand where those same traits belong next. The drive, the discipline, the willingness to do hard things, the need for connection and shared struggle. Marcus talked about how those qualities don't disappear once someone leaves the military, but the environment where they once existed often does. And part of the work Mission 22 is doing is helping veterans discover new arenas where those same strengths can continue to live. Through coaching, community, endurance challenges, shared experiences, and support for both veterans and their families. Lastly, the message Marcus shared that I think applies to all of us, not just veterans, was simple but powerful. Don't do it alone. Asking for help isn't weakness. Sometimes asking for help today allows you to be the person who can help someone else tomorrow. I'm going to say that again because it is so insightful. Asking for help today allows you to be the person who can help someone else tomorrow. If you'd like to learn more about Mission 22, their programs, or ways you can support their work, you can visit mission22.org. And if today's conversation resonated with you, we'd truly appreciate your support. Liking the episode, leaving a comment, or passing it along to someone who might need it helps these conversations reach more people. And when it comes to reducing veteran suicide, remember, take the lead. Ever heard the saying, it takes a village to raise a child? Well, same applies here. It takes an awesome audience like you to help get this message in front of someone who needs to hear they're not alone. That's why I ask for your continued support. Whether you like, share, follow, or leave a review, and if so inclined, can donate, it all helps more than you know. If something resonated, pass it along. You never know who needs it. Want to connect? Email me anytime. dancingwithdepression@yahoo.com. And remember, when it comes to depression, take the lead. Content and safety notice. Dancing with Depression may include discussions of suicide, self-harm, trauma, and emotional distress. Listeners' discretion advised. This podcast shares personal experiences and is not a substitute for professional mental health care. If you need immediate support, call or text 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. For non-crisis help and resources, contact NAMI at 1-800-950-6264.